is there the same difficulty of having these courageous conversations about politics as well? Because what I'm hearing in this documentary about Uncle Tom is there's almost two divergent groups amongst the Black community in the political realm, and that there's as much difficulty in having this conversation on the Black population as we're having it globally, and then more specifically amongst the whites. So what I'm hearing in your discussion is that the documentary basically says that we're not having this conversation amongst the Black community either.
Before I answer that question, I want to reverse it and ask you the same question rhetorically.
Yeah.
And ask, do you have divergent views within white culture? Do you have divergent views in the Jewish culture? And I see you nodding your head. And so I have to ask, why are you surprised that, or even mildly surprised, or why would you expect any less? Human beings have different opinions. I don't care what culture you're in.
Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
All right, Dr. Phil.
Hey, Dr. Peter, how things going?
Good. I said that, and all of a sudden I envisioned a bald white guy.
Yeah, well, I'm not cutting my hair, and I'm definitely not. And there's nothing I can do about my skin color.
No, I can't do anything about that.
Not that I wanted to, but you can envision all you want. I mean,
well, I also, as much as Dr. Phil tries to help people's lives, I hope we're doing just the same. But again, thank you to Nationwide for allowing us, to come into your homes and make a difference, and encouraging you to have a courageous conversation. So, Dr. Phil, what you've been watching on TV? I know you are always watching something that is educational, influential, gets you thinking. So what's come across the computer screen or your screen at home?
I'm a sci-fi freak, and I don't.
Really?
Yes, so I love sci-fi. I'm a Trekkie, and anything time related. But to me, those are just extensions of quantum physics and creation of the universe, et cetera. They're just artistic extensions of that. And I think when I'm watching documentaries, et cetera, of the fringes of our society or of issues that affect our society, I see that as an extension of life. The latest that took my interest, I think the title of it, I'll have to check on this, but the latest documentary that I read was called Uncle Tom. It was a series of interviews of conservative African Americans and the reasons for their views, who people may consider minority views in the minority community. And I'd recommend it to anybody who watch it, because it's very enlightening, at least on the individuals that were the subjects of the documentary. But I was concerned by the conspirational tone that this group has taken from a political perspective. Our conversations have been based on humanism. And as you know, I believe race is a social construct, essentially a myth. And I did enjoy listening to different thought processes. I enjoyed watching intelligent people trying to educate themselves. But it seemed to me that in some cases, they just found another jar of Kool-Aid to drink, and they've become rabid about that particular flavor. And I now realize I'm just a moderate. I can listen to AOC and Larry Elder, and I can disagree with both of them on certain things. I believe in personal accountability, but I believe there's a role for government as well. And I also believe that well-intended good intentions can backfire when people do not think things through. And that has occurred, be it welfare or the passage of the Texas abortion law that gives vigilantes the right to sue anybody who breaks the law. And I find it interesting that California is now using that same tactic on gun control in order to challenge the constitutionality of that kind of law. And if the law stands, I'm very intrigued with the intent that the governor is using here, but it's a very dangerous tactic if it survives Supreme Court approval. I think it's designed to kill the structure of such a law, to force the Supreme Court eventually to look at the structure of that law and the inherent danger of that structure. And therefore, hopefully, both laws will be invalidated and struck down based on the structure. However, even if I got my wish, that will mean we will have spent another 10 years on legislation, and we're no better than we were when we started. We haven't moved substantially forward in either birth control or abortion or gun control.
So having not watched the show, and for those of you who are interested, it's on Amazon Prime. It sounds like, and again, I'm interpreting a little bit from what you're saying, a little bit what I'm seeing online, that it is a defense of the conservative Black movement, that it is trying to support the fact that in the face of everything that's going on politically, there is room for Black conservatives to have a voice as well.
Well, I hope there is. This is America, right?
Right.
I don't think it's as much a plea for room for alternative positions. I think it's more of an explanation. It was an attempt to provide an opportunity. But after I finished hearing the film, and I need to go back and look at the credits now, I got the impression this was that rather than an objective investigation into how did you get here, et cetera, it was by the end of the documentary, it became more of a promotion of a particular line of thought. And it was presented in a fear-provoking manner that took outcomes and provided motivations for those outcomes, and to suggest that government assistance is an opiate to minorities and that it's a payoff for complacency so that they can continue to be abused, and that the liberal wing of our culture is promoting and selling that opiate, and that they're doing a disservice to our culture in doing that, and that they've been hoodwinked and bamboozled and may even be profiting from a liberal line of thought. There was no talk about the opiate that the federal government gives to majority farmers to keep their land fallow. There was no talk about the opiate that the federal government gives businesses in order to support certain industries. You know, what I saw was a shuffling of the deck and a reconfiguration of the facts to fit another narrative.
So let me ask you a question. I feel that the ability to speak from one side to the other, liberal to conservative, right to left, is getting more and more difficult globally. Amongst the Black community, is there the same difficulty of having these courageous conversations about politics as well? Because what I'm hearing in this documentary about Uncle Tom is there's almost two divergent groups amongst the Black community in the political realm, and that there's as much difficulty in having this conversation on the Black population as we're having it globally, and then more specifically amongst the whites. So what I'm hearing in your discussion is that the documentary basically says that we're not having this conversation amongst the Black community either.
Before I answer that question, I want to reverse it and ask you the same question rhetorically.
Yeah.
And ask, do you have divergent views within white culture? Do you have divergent views in the Jewish culture? And I see you nodding your head. And so I have to ask, why are you surprised that, or even mildly surprised, or why would you expect any less? Human beings have different opinions. I don't care what culture you're in. And the real problem we have right now is, again, we're trying to describe this by race. And we have more multicultural people who recognize they're multicultural, that I think eventually sex is going to solve this problem. I'm sorry. I didn't, I almost blew my own mind.
I'm waiting to hear where this one's going.
We're less homogeneous than we know, and one of the reasons I like to watch Henry Louis Gates' program is because just because we can trace DNA now, it's as if all of a sudden we've discovered that none of us is as pure as we thought. There was something going on in the barn a long time ago in all of our lives, and we have created this sense of pureness in all of our communities. But back to the original question, of course, we have difficulty discussing it. During the civil rights movement, you don't think that there weren't discussions about whether they should march or not. You don't think that there weren't discussions about whether or not they should boycott or not. There were people that were scared to march because if their boss saw them, they might lose their jobs. And so while they were planning in church, there were people sitting there saying, I'm not sure this is a good idea. And some of them said, you know what, I'll fry the chicken, I'll fix the dinner, but I can't be on the street. You all came down here from New York and you're going to leave, and I'm not sure you're going to stay the course. Then all of a sudden, at some point, Martin Luther King never left. He was still in Jackson, Mississippi, or he was still in the Delta, and found some people had enough courage to change activation, not their mind. They were in support, but they differed in how to approach it. The Uncle Tom phrase tends to infer that it's a step and fetch it Black man. It's the house nigger versus the field nigger. And the house always ate well and did exactly what Massa told him to, and did it well and made Massa feel good. And you didn't whip the house nigger because he woke you up in the morning and said it's time to get up. Then he gave you your shoes, and if it was part of the routine, he shaved you. Now, if you can trust a house to shave you, then you got somebody who you have truly subdued. And then you go out in the field and you have to whip that person to get him to pick cotton.
So the title is intentionally inflammatory.
The title is intentionally provocative.
Right. And it's essentially an effort to shine a light on the fact that maybe the conservative Black thinkers aren't necessarily getting as much attention.
I think it's a recruitment film, honestly.
Okay.
But I also think it's an attempt to explain why they believe what they believe. My discomfort is they don't just promote their beliefs. As a matter of fact, there's a person in there who did his own research, and it was incomplete research. And just as I think I've seen the same effect, actually, I have to tell you, I think he was steered into this mentality by a good friend that asked him some very good questions, but then gave him some very partial data that caused me to understand why he was so convinced that his previous thinking was wrong. And it actually came back to our education. Once again, his story. Which story do you tell in public education? And right now, the threat is everybody's trying to control that story. And we're trying to control that story because part of the reason we can't discuss issues like this is because these issues stir up emotions. And sometimes our conversations break down because when those emotions get stirred and I now have the opportunity to truly express my anger, and I do it in a way that insults the person I'm talking to. I do it in a way that embarrasses the person I'm talking to. I do it in a way where I include the person I'm talking to as part of the group and all of a sudden, this is my chance to unload on all the grievances I have, rather than trying to understand first, if you believe in it, if you support those practices that cause my grievances, if you understand what it causes, and even if you were a part of it, and if you were a part of it, was it out of ignorance or privilege or active support? And if we can't differentiate it because we're too busy grouping it and I've made my decision, then I don't care if I've insulted you, which means that I must not care about solving the problem.
I don't think I know any conservative Black, but it would be interesting to have that conservative Black perspective on one of our conversations.
Yeah, well, see, I'll be honest with you, you don't know any really liberal Blacks either.
That's true. I make assumptions.
Yes, you do, because I'm a moderate Black.
Right. You expressed that at the very beginning in our
In some cases, I'm conservative.
right.
I believe in personal accountability. I believe in fiscal accountability. I believe welfare should be reformed. I am a supporter of workfare, but I'm also a believer in totally revamping the prison system. I believe there is need for punishment. That's what personal accountability leads to. If you have lack of personal accountability, it needs to lead to societal consequences. And society has to take care of it. But society cannot write you off because you made a mistake. And it definitely can't write you off when they set you up for that mistake. And the narrative that comes out of this conservative culture, at least in this documentary, was a little too extreme in fighting back that the government didn't, that there are no injustices that are structural. Excuse me, not injustice, but that there are no structural injustices built in for the same purpose as welfare that they claim welfare does, being the opiate. Essentially, if you take the two arguments of the two extremes, you have the stick and the carrot. And most African Americans are fighting the stick because most African Americans are the ones who suffer from the stick. And those that are able to escape the stick claim that they did it on their own. They don't need all these special programs to eliminate the effect of the stick. And they're encouraging their fellow field workers, follow me, just dodge the whip. You can do it.
You use a very interesting terminology and use it a couple of different times. And that is that welfare is an opioid, and that the government is using welfare as an opioid to, in this case, get Blacks addicted to the needs of the welfare state.
Yes.
Is that my interpretation correct?
Yes, that's your interpretation. And the benefits out of that is that the welfare state, as opioids do, tend to sedate your desire to improve yourself. And if money is always coming into the household, then it dampens the drive to work. And therefore, you self-limit your aspirations and you'll take the low-paying jobs. You want to be rich, but if your basic needs are taken care of, you need something else to motivate you. Maybe the rats in the apartment, maybe not being able to pay for the heat will motivate you to get out of there. But there's this theory and conspiracy. That's just behavioral science, right? But when you get it into the social political structure of this narrative, it essentially says this is an organized attempt to do that. When the welfare program was developed, it truly was developed. It was with good intentions to try to help people move into the middle class. It was an initial recognition that there was a group of people that we haven't prepared. You know, when you suddenly integrate school, when we integrated schools in Jackson in 1969, I believe, I was in the 9th grade. So you have a group of people that went to substandard schools for 9 years, and now they're expected to compete on a level playing field with people and go to school with people that are at quote unquote better schools for 9 years. And if education is as important as we think it is, how do you make that disparity up immediate? There was no thought of social behavior or educational concepts when we tried to intermingle our societies on purpose. We only thought about the concept of equality. And I had a different educational privilege. My first 4 years was in a private laboratory school on a Black HBCU campus that created a work ethic and a love for education. So when I got into public school in the 5th grade, I was always completing my math book and asking for more and didn't understand how weird I was.
That hasn't changed.
Yeah. No, it has changed. I do understand how weird I am.
Okay. Well, you use the term opioid welfare, and it was focused in the Black community, but
I also use the term opioid as welfare for white farmers.
Right. In terms of what they do for government subsidy with their farms.
I call that welfare too.
Okay. I was gonna say, there's a good percentage of whites that are on welfare as well.
Yes. Oh,
So,
absolutely. I can't tell you how many times I've had that discussion. There are more whites on welfare. When you when you say good percentage.
well, I have the percentages in front of me.
Yeah, good. What are they?
43% of those on welfare are white, 28% are Hispanic, and 23% are Black.
Right. Now, translate that into numbers.
Right. Well, translate that into the actual population of the United States, and we're highly represented Hispanics and Blacks who are on welfare from the general population standpoint.
I'm sorry, say that again.
There's a much higher representation of Hispanics and Blacks on welfare from a percentage of their total population versus the white population.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you looked at it from that perspective.
Well, I saw 43% whites on welfare, and it's like, that's a significant number.
Yes,
Again,
because in some places, 72% of our population is white.
right.
So if 60% of 300 million people are white, why are we focusing on the percentage of the segmented population and saying, well, a larger number of Blacks are on than there are whites? And I'm like, but there are a lot more whites in it.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, this has become a Black program? How do you get there? This is one of those arcane arguments. Why are we talking about that? Welfare was designed to help people. And yet we're having an argument about who needs it the most. And we're basing that on the percentage of these socially constructed designation, not human beings, without having the legislative discussion as to the opportunities each of these groups have. My question is, why is the white demographics so high?
This all started as a conversation of the use of the term opioids or opiate, because I found that enlightening in the sense that you get addicted to it in the same way that you binge watch something or you have to have candy or whatever the case may be, that there are people who have become addicted to the welfare state. And that, I think in the documentary, it's saying that addiction is keeping people from being more successful.
Yes, but they're being more provocative about it. They're not just saying that it's keeping them passive. They're saying it's designed to keep them passive.
Yes, there's a reason that it exists, and the reason is because it keeps people in line.
Yeah, and for me, that's just rewrapping a consequence with a motivation.
Well, go ahead. I want to finish up this conversation and move on, because I think we've got some other things to talk about. But it's an interesting. Now I've got to go find the time to watch Uncle Tom.
Yeah, and then we should talk again after you've had a chance to see it.
Well, and maybe some of the listeners will want to feedback on it as well, because to me, as I said earlier, the title is extremely provocative. And then to recognize that it was focused on, without knowing the background and the foundation from which you presented it, I would have not understood what I was watching initially. I would have just thought it was it was going to tie back to the Uncle Tom's Cabin, not tie to the current environment that we're living in. So I appreciate.
So I have to say this before we get off that. You should read the book Uncle Tom's Cabin,
right,
in order to understand the character of Uncle Tom. Right. Uncle Tom was a house servant. Right. And had Black privilege, so to speak. He still had, in most cases, he still lived in the shack, but his marriage was probably safer in order to keep him happy. And he had a little more authority over the rest of the slaves in the plantation, because he had the trust of the slave owner. Right. But he wouldn't have had that if he didn't do everything that was done. And so it was that step and fetch it kind of mentality that allowed you to be elevated to the job and be protected from the sun. And you could get water almost anytime because you were in the kitchen, and you were fed better because you were doing the cooking. and you were stealing the whole time. You were tasting to make sure that that the food was good, but you were also tasting because you were hungry. But the point is that it is portrayed as a negative image.
Right.
When everybody in my culture had to step and fetch it. As a matter of fact, everybody in our American culture has to step and fetch it to some degree.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.